The phone rang in the dimly lit kitchen in the suburbs of Chicago. My husband's voice yelling through the speaker. "How dare you cheat and try to steal my house?" "Claire." I laughed, but my heart ached. Not because of the false accusations, but because I realized a terrifying truth. The man I loved was plotting to ruin me. This is the story of how I turned the tables, making the betrayer the one who lost. The flickering neon sign from the liquor store across the street cast a cold, greenish hue into my kitchen. It buzzed faintly through the double-paned glass like an insect trapped behind the walls. The whole apartment felt like it was holding its breath quiet, tense, and oddly detached from the rest of the city. Even the kettle had stopped its usual hum, as if it, too, was waiting for something to happen. I was standing by the sink, hands still damp from rinsing off the last dinner plate, when my phone vibrated across the counter. I didn't look at it immediately. I knew the name that would flash on the screen. I could feel it before I saw it. Ethan. I dried my hands slowly, deliberately, before picking up the phone. A missed call, then a text. "Don't think I don't know what you've been doing. I'm done. Expect divorce papers, and tell your new little boyfriend goodbye. You'll be out of that house by next month. My parents are moving in." For a second, I just stared at the screen. Then I let out a dry, humorless laugh. There it was. The pattern. The script. I could practically recite the next steps by heart. Accusation, outrage, threats, withdrawal. And then, after a few days of silence, the guilt-laced apology, followed by flowers, followed by another round of gaslighting. But this time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt done. Ethan had always been a man of extremes. He could light up a room with charm one minute and disappear into self-pity the next. When we met at a friend's backyard party in Lincoln Park 4 years ago, he had that golden boy grin and a casual confidence that pulled me in. He talked about architecture, about wanting to build things that lasted. I was fresh out of community college, balancing 2 jobs and still living with a roommate in Rogers Park. I didn't have time for fairy tales, but I wanted to believe him. When he proposed a year later, I made him promise he'd get his life together first. "No ring unless you have a real job," I had said with a smirk. And he did it, or at least, he pretended to. He landed a role at a mid-size construction firm in downtown Chicago. I moved in with him. We split rent. We talked about starting a future, but slowly. The cracks began to show. First came the contract delays, then the paycheck mix-ups, and soon, he was between opportunities more often than he was actually employed. Meanwhile, I kept working at the college bookstore in Evanston. Steady, reliable work. I loved the rhythm of it, checking in textbooks, talking to students, stocking the poetry shelf when no one was looking. There was something comforting in the order, the predictability, the kind of structure Ethan found suffocating. The phone buzzed again. This time, I let it ring. I knew what he'd say, how he'd raise his voice just enough to sound righteous, how he'd throw in the word cheating like a grenade and watch the emotional debris fly. It didn't matter that I hadn't even spoken to another man in weeks. The accusation wasn't about truth, it was about control. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared at the fridge door, still decorated with faded magnets from our supposed honeymoon to Arizona. A dried-up grocery list hung crooked from the corner. I remembered the day we first toured this house. It had chipped molding, a leaky faucet, and smelled faintly of someone else's dog, but I fell in love with it instantly. It was mine, ours, a symbol of something stable. Now he wanted to give it to his parents, 2 people who had never liked me, never approved of the quiet girl with the hourly job. It was almost laughable, if it wasn't so insulting. I made tea instead of answering his calls. Chamomile, simple, unassuming. The same one I drank during finals week back in school, when I pulled all-nighters and believed hard work actually paid off. I sat down at the kitchen table, phone screen still lighting up beside me, and breathed. For the first time in months, maybe years. I wasn't crying. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't scrambling to fix something I hadn't broken. I was just here, calm, present, and oddly clear-headed. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe I'd finally reached the part of the cycle where fear turned into detachment. Whatever it was, I knew something had shifted. I looked around the kitchen at the mismatched dishes, the second-hand chairs, the light bulb that always flickered overhead. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I wasn't going to let Ethan or anyone else take that from me. That night, as the storm outside swept in from Lake Michigan and rain tapped against the windows like a warning, I opened my laptop and began looking up lawyers, not to fight him, not to beg him, but to end this on my own terms. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wouldn't be the one unraveling anymore. He wanted to start a war. I was done being afraid of the thunder. From the outside, our little house in Evanston looked like every other on the block, quaint, modest, with peeling white trim and a porch swing that creaked when the wind got strong enough. But on the inside, something heavier than air had started to settle in. A weight I carried with every grocery trip, every utility bill, every month-end spreadsheet I kept hidden in the kitchen drawer. We had lived there for just over a year. When we first moved in, I'd imagined warm Sunday mornings with pancakes and newspapers, maybe a small garden, maybe even a dog. I didn't picture scrolling through my banking app at midnight, calculating whether I could afford both the mortgage and Ethan's overdue car payment. I paid it anyway. It started subtly at first. Ethan would forget to transfer his half of the rent. He'd say things like, "Can I catch you next week? The check's delayed." Or, "I had to cover lunch with my boss, it was important." At first, I believed him. After all, he was trying. That's what I told myself. But then came the shopping bags, designer sneakers, a new smartwatch, a steakhouse receipt for two totaling more than my week's groceries. I found it in his jacket pocket one morning while doing laundry. When I asked about it, he grinned and said, "You can't network over a salad." Claire, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I reminded myself that marriage meant compromise, that maybe he just hadn't had the stability I'd grown used to. I told myself love required patience. I kept waiting for the return on that investment. We talked about buying the house a few months after our lease ended, or rather, I brought it up, gently, over dinner one evening. I had been saving since college, picking up extra shifts at the bookstore, clipping coupons like my mom used to. Ethan leaned back in his chair, sipping wine I hadn't realized he'd bought $38 a bottle, the label still on the counter. "I've been meaning to tell you," he said, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "My credit's complicated. The bank said I don't have enough work history for a mortgage." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Too many short-term contracts. They want someone with a stable income stream." Whatever that means. I stared at him across the table. "And you didn't think to tell me this before we started touring houses relax," he said. "We can still get it. You'll just be the one applying. No big deal. I'll help with the payments." I felt something cold crawl down my spine. "So you want me to put the entire mortgage in my name?" He gave me that charming, disarming grin I used to love. "Come on, Claire. You're the organized one. The responsible one. You've got the clean record. It's just paperwork." I don't know why I said yes. Maybe it was the dream of the house. Maybe it was the tired look in his eyes that day, or the way he made it sound so temporary, like everything would go back to normal once his next job came through. Maybe I was just scared of admitting I'd bet on the wrong person. 3 months later, I signed the loan papers. And then the job didn't come through. Again. The mortgage payments fell entirely on me. At first, he swore he'd start contributing next month. Then it became once this project gets approved, or once I hear back from this new firm. There was always a reason. Always a delay. Meanwhile, I worked overtime, picked up freelance editing gigs at night, sold a few of my old books on eBay just to make up the difference. Ethan still went out with friends every weekend. When I brought it up gently, with as much care as I could muster, he brushed me off. "I'm networking," he'd say. "You want me to land a job, don't you?" Yes, I did. But what I wanted more, what I needed, was a partner. Instead, I had a roommate who didn't pay rent, a dream house I couldn't afford, and a marriage that felt increasingly like a solo performance. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering how I'd gotten here, how a woman who once prided herself on her independence, who worked 2 jobs to get through school, who never borrowed a dime from anyone, had wound up tethered to someone who treated her like an ATM with a wedding ring. But every time I felt the doubt rise, I buried it beneath hope. Hope that Ethan would change. Hope that this rough patch would pass. Hope that the man who once spoke to me about building a life with meaning still existed somewhere beneath the excuses. It's a dangerous thing, hope. It keeps you trying long after you should have walked away. Looking back, I think I knew then deep down that we weren't going to make it. But admitting that felt like failure, and I'd already invested too much to fold. So I kept pushing forward, kept covering the bills, kept telling myself that marriage meant patience. But the truth was, I was starting to forget who I was without the burden. And worse, I was starting to believe I deserved it. The walls of our house began to feel closer with each passing week, not in a cozy, protective way, but in a way that made it hard to breathe. The air hung heavy, thick with unsaid things, and every door that slammed seemed to echo longer than it should. The tension was no longer occasional, it was constant. Ethan and I had arguments that started with dishes and spiraled into accusations. I'd mention our credit score, and he'd accuse me of making him feel small. I'd ask about his job applications, and he'd storm out, saying I never supported him. It felt like trying to fix a sinking boat with duct tape. Then came the real bombshell. We were in the kitchen, me slicing cucumbers for a salad. Ethan scrolling through his phone with that vacant expression he wore too often lately when he looked up and said, casually, like he was ordering takeout, "I think it's time we let my parents move in." I froze. His parents. The same people who once called me a burden for not making more money, who treated our wedding like an obligation, who had racked up gambling debts so large they had lost their home in Joliet. "You're kidding, right?" I said, setting down the knife. "They need help." "Claire," he said, his tone sharp. "It's not like you're the only one with family." "This isn't just about family," I replied, trying to stay calm. "We barely have space for the 2 of us, and your parents need financial support, not a spare bedroom." He scoffed. "Right. Because money's all you care about. I blinked at him. Are you serious? You've always been like this, he snapped, counting dollars, acting like you're better than everyone just because you can balance a damn spreadsheet. I wanted to scream, not because of the insult, but because of how familiar it had become. The way he twisted concern into selfishness, the way he made compassion look like cruelty. I told him no, that we needed boundaries, that we were not equipped to take in two people with toxic habits and emotional baggage. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell from the hallway wall. He started coming home late after that, always with an excuse, meeting with a realtor, helping Dad make calls, grabbing drinks with a contractor who might have leads. But the signs were there. The cologne I didn't recognize, the muted phone calls in the bathroom, the way he never looked me in the eye anymore. I stopped asking questions, not because I didn't want answers, but because I was afraid of what they might be. I found myself wandering the city more often anything to escape the pressure cooker that our home had become. Sometimes I walked aimlessly down Michigan Avenue, letting the buzz of the city drown out the noise in my head. Other times, I'd sit for hours in a corner booth at a cafe in Evanston, sipping lukewarm coffee, pretending to read a book while counting the cracks in my marriage like pages dog-eared from wear. It was on one of those days, wrapped in a heavy coat with snow still clinging to my boots, that I met him, Ryan. He was already sitting at the table next to mine when I arrived, typing furiously on a laptop covered in real estate stickers. He looked young, mid-20s, maybe, but focused, like someone used to solving puzzles under pressure. At one point, I accidentally knocked over the small dish of sugar packets between us, and a few scattered onto his table. Hostile takeover, I mumbled with a tired smile, reaching to clean it up. He laughed. It's okay. My desk at work looks worse. I froze a little. His voice was kind, not flirtatious, not smug, just human. You're in real estate, I asked. He nodded. New guy at Weller Properties, mostly admin and tech stuff. You college bookstore? I said. But I used to dream of owning one. He smiled, and we ended up talking for half an hour about bookstores, bad coffee, and the weird things clients do when house shopping. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even personal. It was just easy, and that alone felt like a revolution. That night, I told Ethan I ran into someone from Weller, left it vague on purpose, unsure why I did. He barely looked up from his phone. Weller's a mess. Dad had a bad deal with them last year. I didn't press further, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. The next time Ethan left for a meeting, I didn't wait up, I didn't call, I didn't check in. Instead, I sat in our living room, lights dimmed, silence buzzing louder than any scream could. The woman I used to be the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who made excuses for him was fading. In her place, a different version of me was waking up, tired, lonely, but sharper, less willing to be fooled. I wasn't ready to leave, not yet, but I had started keeping a mental list of the lies, of the cracks, of the things I would no longer tolerate. And somewhere in the darkness, a single thread of clarity glowed like a match in a cave. Not every light burns bright. Sometimes it flickers quietly, right before the fire catches. Chicago in the rain has a way of getting under your skin. It wasn't just wet, it was cold in a way that felt personal. Like the wind knew exactly how to sneak into the seams of your coat and settle in your bones. That week, the clouds hadn't lifted once. The sky stayed a dull gray, and our house already quiet sank into a deeper kind of silence. Ethan was away on a work trip in Michigan. 4 days in, no details, just vague mentions of meetings and contractors. I should have felt relieved with him gone. I should have enjoyed the space, the quiet, the lack of tension. But I didn't. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something I couldn't name. And then the phone rang. He didn't even bother with small talk. You thought I wouldn't find out Ethan's voice, sharp and rehearsed, sliced through the speaker like a blade. You're sleeping with that kid from Weller. Ryan. Right. What a cliché. I blinked, frozen in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, he snapped. I have proof. I talked to people. You're cheating on me. Claire, I'm done. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. And don't get comfortable, you'll be out of my house soon. My parents are moving in. It was like my brain couldn't catch up fast enough with the words. Cheating. My house. For a second, I couldn't breathe. But then, as the panic started to rise, something inside me clicked. It was too perfect. Too clean. Too scripted. You've been planning this, I whispered. Haven't you? He hung up without another word. I stood in the hallway for what felt like an hour, the rain tapping on the windows, the silence pressing in, and then the doorbell rang. It was Ryan, soaking wet, hair dripping, breath fogging up the glass as he looked in. I need to talk to you, he said. He stepped inside, shaking off the cold, and held out his hands like he wasn't sure where to begin. I didn't want to be part of this anymore. I didn't think you deserved it. My chest tightened, part of what he looked at me, guilt in his eyes. But no hesitation. Ethan paid me to flirt with you, to make it look like something was going on. I blinked. What I didn't know the full story at first. He just said you were stuck up and controlling, and he needed leverage for a divorce, that if I helped him push you over the edge, he'd make it worth my time. He swallowed hard. But then I met you, and none of it made sense. You were kind. You were tired, but not bitter, just someone trying to stay afloat. So I started digging. I sat down slowly, the floor beneath me feeling suddenly unstable. He continued. Ethan's been cheating on you, for months, with someone at his firm. He's in debt. Claire. Bad debt. Gambling. Real estate flips. Failed loans. He needs your house to clean it all up. That's what this whole thing is about. The room spun. I should have cried. I didn't. Instead, I felt a stillness come over me. Not calm. Not numb. Just focus. Like I'd been sleepwalking and suddenly, finally, snapped awake. Then let's sell it, I said. Ryan blinked. What? The house, I said firmly. If it means that much to him, let's take it off the table before he can touch it. It's under my name. Anyway, let's sell it. Quietly. Legally. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I can help. We spent the next 3 days working in secret. Ryan called in favors at Weller. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not for Ethan, but to say goodbye to something I once believed in. We scheduled showings, staged the furniture, filed the paperwork, all while Ethan was still in Michigan, blissfully unaware. On the last night before the sale closed, I stood in the center of our living room, the same room where we once decorated a crooked Christmas tree, where I cried over bills, where he swore he'd be better. And I didn't feel sad. I felt free. The apartment I moved into in Evanston was nothing like the house. It was smaller, older, and the paint chipped around the windows. But it was mine. Every square foot earned, not promised. Ryan helped carry the boxes. He didn't push, didn't linger, just handed me the last one and said, I'm around if you need anything. I nodded. I might, I replied, but I think I need to stand on my own for a while first. He smiled. Good. I didn't tell Ethan. He found out when he came home to an empty driveway and a realtor sign that read, sold in bold red letters. He called me twice. I didn't answer, because I no longer owed him explanations. I owed myself freedom. And this was the first real step. My new apartment in Evanston wasn't fancy, but it was warm in a way that my old house had never been. The walls were painted soft gray, the floors creaked charmingly underfoot, and the sunlight in the morning pooled gently across my thrifted kitchen table like it belonged there. Like I belonged there. It smelled like fresh coffee and lavender detergent. It sounded like peace. No more slammed doors, no more walking on eggshells, just space to breathe, to heal. I was folding laundry one afternoon, window cracked open, rain tapping softly on the sill when I heard the knock. 3 firm raps. I didn't have to guess. I opened the door, and there he was. Ethan. His hair was slightly disheveled, blazer damp from the drizzle, but the arrogance was still there, like he believed he could charm his way through concrete. I figured you'd want to talk, he said, stepping forward like he owned the threshold. I don't, I replied, blocking the doorway. But since you're here, we might as well end this. He looked confused for a moment, like he hadn't expected that answer. Then, just as quickly, he smirked. You really think this changes anything? You sold the house? Big deal. You'll still be held accountable for I have proof. I cut in. Of everything. Your fake affair setup, the recordings, the payments to Ryan. That made him pause. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I owed him civility, but because I wanted him to see exactly how far I'd come. He walked in. Slower now, noticing the difference, the simplicity, the honesty of it. I don't want a long, ugly divorce. Ethan, I said, crossing my arms. But if you push me, I will take this public. The audio clips, the financial trail. I have everything, and Ryan is ready to testify if needed. Ethan's face tightened. His charm faltered for the first time. Ryan doesn't scare me. I smiled, cool and quiet. He should. I let the silence sit for a beat before I added. Because Ryan is more than just some guy you tried to manipulate. He's the son of Andrew Keller. He blinked. I watched it register the name, the weight of it. Andrew Keller, the owner of Weller Properties. A man Ethan had once bragged about impressing over lunch. A potential investor Ethan desperately needed to bail out his parents' failing finances. I told him everything. I continued, and so did Ryan. He staggered back slightly, no longer posturing. You torched a bridge you didn't even know you were standing on. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally asked, What do you want? I want my freedom, I said. Sign the divorce. Don't fight for the house. Don't touch another cent of what I've earned, and stay the hell out of my life. He didn't answer. Not then. But I could see it, the recognition that he had lost, that the woman he used to manipulate with silence, with flattery, with fear, was no longer here. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was done. The next day, he called. He agreed to everything. 2 days later, I got a call from his father. I didn't answer the first time. The second time, I did just long enough to hear the venom in his voice. "You ungrateful little parasite," he hissed. "After all we've done for you, you spit on this family. You'll regret it when no one wants you." I hung up mid-rant. Then I blocked the number. And just like that, the last thread snapped. News spread quickly in their circles. Ethan lost his connection with Weller. Other firms backed away. The rumors about his finances, the shady dealings, the failed schemes, they all came to light faster than I expected. Eventually, I heard they were forced to sell their last asset, his parents' condo in River Forest, and move into a cramped rental off the expressway. The kind with water stains on the ceilings and neighbors who played loud music at 2 a.m. But by then, I had stopped keeping tabs. Not out of spite. Out of peace. One night, as I lay curled on my couch with a cup of tea, legs tucked under a knit blanket, I realized something. I had spent so long trying to hold a life together that was never built on truth. I had poured myself into a marriage like patching a cracked vase with scotch tape, believing if I just tried hard enough, it wouldn't shatter. But it wasn't failure to let go. It was freedom. Ethan didn't break me. He revealed me, because I'd forgotten how strong I was without him. And now, I remembered. 1 year later, the world looked different. The air by Lake Michigan smelled cleaner, saltier, somehow, like freedom. The wind didn't sting anymore. It just carried the sound of kids laughing, of dogs barking, of waves gently slapping the rocks. The shadows that used to cling to my ankles had retreated. I could finally walk in the sun without feeling like I owed anyone an explanation. My apartment in Evanston remained modest, a corner unit in a quiet building with ivy creeping up the brick. But I filled it with light. Real light. No more broken blinds. No more flickering bulbs. There were fresh flowers on the table, secondhand furniture with character. And my bookshelf finally had room for fiction and future plans. I was no longer just surviving. I was becoming. It started with Ryan. After everything with Ethan unraveled, Ryan remained a quiet presence, never intrusive, never assuming. He checked in occasionally, usually under the pretense of real estate updates or shared connections. But beneath the surface, there was something steadier, gentler. One day, over coffee at the same cafe in Evanston where we first met, he leaned forward and asked, "You ever think about working in real estate?" I laughed. "You mean as a career? You've got the eye," he said, "and the people skills. You know how to read rooms better than anyone I've seen." That's how it began. He introduced me to his team at Keller & Co. Yes, that Keller, his father's firm. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. What started as admin work quickly turned into client-facing roles. I helped nervous couples navigate open houses, reassured young buyers about their first mortgages, listened when sellers cried as they signed away old chapters. I wasn't just good at it. I thrived. I found pieces of myself I hadn't touched in years: confidence, creativity, clarity. And somewhere along the way, between showings and late-night debriefs, Ryan became more than a colleague. He became home. We didn't fall in love quickly. It was slow, respectful, like opening a window inch by inch to let the light in. Neither of us wanted to repeat old mistakes, but the love we found was built on something neither of us had really known before: trust. When he proposed, it wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet Sunday morning by the lake. We were sitting on a bench with coffee in hand, watching ducks bob on the water. "I don't want to fix you," he said, his voice low. "I just want to stand beside you." I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We got married in a small park near Lake Michigan. The grass was still damp from the morning dew, and I wore a simple ivory dress that swayed in the breeze. Ryan's family was there, warm, laughing, welcoming. His mom held my hands before the ceremony and whispered, "Thank you for choosing him." But the truth was, he chose me, too. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to earn it. I heard about Ethan a few months later. Apparently, he was living back with his parents in a cramped 2-bedroom rental on the edge of Cicero. His real estate connections had all but dried up. The company he once hoped would rescue his reputation had blacklisted him quietly. Professionally, no one wanted to touch his name. And the court had finalized the divorce with a ruling for monthly spousal support. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. His story was no longer mine to carry. On the day of our 1-year anniversary, Ryan and I walked along the lakeshore, hand in hand, the city skyline soft in the distance. We passed a little girl flying a red kite and an elderly couple feeding pigeons. "This is what peace feels like," I said softly. He squeezed my hand. "Took a hell of a storm to get here. Worth it," I replied. Because it was. Because now, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who didn't flinch at her own reflection. A woman who once gave everything to save a crumbling marriage and then gave herself permission to leave. A woman who rebuilt not just her life, but her sense of self. I was no longer Claire who stayed. I was Claire who left. Claire who chose. Claire who healed. The final irony: Ethan had once accused me and Ryan of being together when we weren't. Now we were, not out of guilt, or drama, or revenge, but because love grew best where lies had been cleared like weeds, and truth was allowed to bloom. I don't believe in fairy tales anymore, but I do believe in rising, in taking back your name, in building something beautiful out of brokenness, because sometimes the darkest corners show you the way to your own light, and when you step into it fully, freely, it feels less like an ending and more like a beginning.